Thank you for making the time to visit with me in my music room here in the Midwest today. My name is Greg Weaver, and the name The Audio Analyst is a name I first copyrighted back in 1988 as the name of my first magazine. I'm introducing this new channel to you today as a way of sharing my love and understanding of the methods and gear we necessarily must use to recreate and enjoy music in our homes and in our lives in a way that may reach more people more effectively. A colleague and friend recently reminded me in an interview we were doing for his channel that I've been writing about this subject for nearly 35 years. It just seems natural that the next step for me should be to start sharing my experiences more personally and directly through the most successful and widely accessible video platform available, allowing my insights and experiences on these matters to reach the largest possible audience of viewers who might benefit from that acquired understanding. With your help, as it grows and expands, I expect to bring you relevant product reviews, new gear introductions, interviews with prominent designers, engineers, manufacturers, even musicians, take you to national and international audio shows, show you how-to tutorials, bring you discussions on vintage gear, music, system tweaks, room taming, setup. I'll probably even regale you with a tale or two of amusing experiences I've had over the years. While some of you may recognize my name or be familiar with my work, especially here in the United States, I wanted to share with you how deeply and thoroughly I understand the matters I'll be addressing here, how deeply rooted my passions for it are, how I got here, and why you might want to tune into the information I'll be posting. As such, I'll apologize now for the detailed narrative that's about to follow, but I think you'll agree, should you make it all the way through, that my credentials on the matters of home audio and music reproduction represent an authoritative level of experience over a career that has created a tremendous knowledge base and a set of reference points. I'm currently on the masthead of 3 major audio magazines in the United States. I'm a senior writer for the print magazine The Absolute Sound, and a senior editor for both Enjoy the Music and Positive Feedback. And I'm highly likely to be writing for a 4th journal soon. Plans are in the works. As hokey as it sounds, my journal started when I was just a toddler. Some of my earliest memories involve music. At 3 or 4 years old, I clearly recall music playing on the console radio in the living room or on Dad's transistor radio in the kitchen. Transistor radios were a development that had only been born the year before I was, and this is when we lived in New York. By the early 1960s, my mother's failing health precipitated a move to Arizona. I remember spending hours listening to the radio and hearing songs like Johnny Horton's The Battle of New Orleans and Sink the Bismarck, or Mark Dinning's Teen Angel. These songs drew me in, as much because of their lyrical content as the almost hypnotic-like attraction the music had on me. By age 9, I had moved to Pennsylvania, and my battery-powered transistor radio had become my inseparable companion, especially over summer breaks from school. The pivotal change came as I discovered and started spending time with the family stereo, just sitting otherwise stagnant in our basement. It was an unseemly late 1950s beast from Motorola, with one oval speaker in the front of the cabinet where the controls and amplifiers were, and a second in a detachable top that could be strung out 10 feet away for stereo. During the 8th grade, when I was 13, violin virtuoso Joshua Heifetz played a concert in our school auditorium as part of a concert tour, and I got to see and hear him play his Stradivarius from 5th row center. Yeah, that left an impression, to say the least. Though I was familiar with classical music, this event awakened me to the unbelievable power and beauty the world of classical music had to offer. Also, by this time, I had started listening to Chicago's massively powerful AM station, WCFL, and had just found 2 ear-opening, album-oriented rock FM stations from Pittsburgh, WDVE and WYDD. That same year, at 13, I bought my first system from a department store. An all-in-one shelf-top system. A receiver with a turntable, an 8-track player, external speakers, thanks to my paper route money. But it wasn't long before I grew tired of that, and over my summer break between 10th and 11th grades, when I was 15, I persuaded a slightly older buddy who could drive to take me some 30-odd miles away to a neighboring city that had, believe it or not, a store dedicated to just audio gear. A stereo shop. I remember that I couldn't wait to visit this new store. It was owned and managed by the son of a couple who played bridge with my parents, which is how I learned about it. What a wonderland. Even though I couldn't afford anywhere near the best gear they had to offer, I could afford a Rotel integrated amplifier, a pair of Sony Superscope speakers with Wizard cones, and a Girard turntable with a Stanton cartridge. Yeah, now I was finally in the game. Well, certainly among my school peers. Well, it didn't take more than about 3 weeks after I had that set up in my room for one of my buddies to ask me how he could get one. Since none of us could drive yet, it appeared that I was in a seller's market, so I sold it to him for what I had paid for it, took the money, plus some additional funds, and went back to the well. This time I moved up a little bit in power and quality. Well, guess what? Within weeks of showing off that gear, another buddy took that system off my hands, and I found myself back at the well yet again. With these two purchases just a matter of some weeks apart, the owner naturally asked what I was doing. When I explained it to him, I literally saw the light bulb go on over his head. With a huge smile on his face, he led me back into his stockroom where he said, "Here, take one of these, take one of these, take this, take a pair of these." It seemed I'd become a stereo salesman at age 15. And this was all about the time I started taking classes on computer programming at my high school and began commuting to and taking programming classes at a college in the town that had this same stereo shop. That's another story. Throughout high school, I spent time with friends whose parents had the disposable dough to spend on some nice stereo gear. One friend from those days had gone off into the 10-inch open reel tape machine world with DBX, noise reduction at 7.5 or at 7 and even 7.5 or even 15 inches per second. Another opted for Macintosh power and preamplification to drive his Dalkus DQ10s. That was fabulous. Another had gotten a Transcriptors Saturn turntable fitted with their vestigial arm and a Supex cartridge to feed his quad electronics and drive his double advent larger speaker system. The Transcriptors table and arm was the one that Stanley Kubrick used in Alex's room in his 1971 film A Clockwork Orange. If you've seen that film, you know what I'm talking about. But probably the most significant system I heard in the early 1970s came from yet another friend who had a BIC 980 belt-driven turntable fitted with his the brand new Shure V15 Type 3 cartridge. It had just come out weeks before. He was using a phase linear 4000 preamplifier with its autocorrelator, peak-on limiter, and downward expander. These were some very early noise reduction and dynamic expansion methods from the mind of the brilliant Bob Carver. And he was using the 350 watt per channel phase linear 700B amp to drive a pair of Winslow Burho's EPI 400 mini towers. Wow. Speaking of Bob Carver, I was thrilled to work with him and interview Bob while writing his profile in industry history for the Absolute Sound's Illustrated History of High-End Audio Volume 2 Electronics. I'm getting ahead of myself though. After I started driving, going to live music events was just a natural progression. I attended and photographed rock shows like Uriah Heep, the Edgar Winter Group, the James Gang, even saw Bob Seger and the Silver Bullet Band play at a county fair. I started attending something on the order of 2 shows a month over the next decade and a half. I even caught Miles Davis completely by chance in a small club when I was 19 and going to photography school in Pittsburgh. Yeah, that didn't suck at all. I'll tell you that story sometime. Also, by 1973, I had discovered these two magazines that were really out there. These were, of course, Harry Pearson's then new The Absolute Sound, which in turn led me to, at that time, the rather irregularly published Stereophile from J. Gordon Holt. Some of the things they were saying were outrageous and highly provocative to this still teenager. Nevertheless, they really served to fuel the fire, and by this point my quest was clear. I wanted to be able to reproduce recorded music as realistically as possible with all the power, nuance, and emotion that I experienced at all the live events I was attending. The next logical step took me to all the audio retailers I could find, both in department stores and in dedicated stereo shops. By now I had become terribly fascinated with the magic that was the loudspeaker. My overwhelming fascination with them led me to what must be seen now, looking back, as probably an inevitable conclusion. I started to design and build my own creations. In the 70s and into the 80s, even the 90s, I built dozens of loudspeaker systems for some diverse applications, including some very forward-thinking automotive speakers, some unique home 2-channel and theater products, background systems for large retail stores and fitness centers, even reinforcement systems for nightclubs and bars. I bought drivers and crossover components from places like Audio Concepts, way before Mike Zerko started building his own products, as well as from Speaker Lab and Metasound. I even wrote my own software in the mid-'80s to help assist with the number crunching associated with crossover design. What was surprising to me is that after reconnecting with many of the people I knew back in the day via Facebook, I've learned that many of those systems that I've designed and built from the early 70s on are still in service. I was fascinated, quite surprised. The next step in my audio journey led me to become a successful salesman on the electronics sales floor, and for 2 reasons. First, it would give me access to the manufacturers, representatives, their technicians, and the engineers who could and would really answer my questions. And I had also discovered that as an employee, I could buy equipment at dealer cost or even through what was known as an industry accommodation price. I started taking components and speakers home for evaluation and seeking out and attending regional and national audio expos and shows. I was astounded with the differences I was able to identify under such controlled circumstances. Through the late 1970s, at least among my peers, I had become the acknowledged expert. No one I was acquainted with made a purchase without first finding out how I felt about the piece or pieces in question. In the early 80s, I decided to formalize my electronics education by enrolling in Control Data Institute's Digital Electronics program. In 1984, I graduated with a certificate in digital electronics with honors, and was then much more comfortable dealing with all things electronics, from simple DC through AC circuits to microprocessors. Because of my strong engineering and electronics background, in the mid-1990s, I partnered and ran an electronics repair and modification shop. I designed and installed custom automobile competition sound systems, repaired and designed circuits for coin-operated upright video game consoles for video arcades, as well as repaired and modified consumer and professional electronics, things like Commodore computers and CD players, amplifiers, and turntables. I did a lot of upgrades and mods to electronics and tables, especially CD players. By upgrading both power supply and analog audio circuit components of CD players like the Magnavox CDB series, I could take a $329 CD player and get it to sound much more like a $1,200 or $1,500 player. But one of the most enjoyable tasks associated with owning and running that repair shop, or that electronics shop, was installing 12-volt audio and security systems. I did contract work for several local automotive electronic shops, as well as some OEM work for a few local car dealerships, and I built a number of competition systems for car audio competition events. My association with car audio throughout the 80s and 90s, starting with Car Audio Nationals originally, then moving on to the International Auto Sound Challenge Association, included being a judge for Region 2 IASCA, where I was often chosen to assume the role of head judge. I regularly enjoyed inviting other sound quality judges into my listening room to hear the virtues of vinyl and 8-foot-tall electrostatic loudspeakers. Most of the judges at that time were car audio installers, with no real high-performance audio experience. I would invite them over to hear my system, which at the time included a Lin Sondek LP12 fitted with a Magnapan Unitrack 1 carbon fiber unipivot tone arm with a Monster Cable Sigma Genesis 2000 moving coil cartridge. That cartridge was designed and built by Hisayoshi Nakatsuka, who he had a remarkable history. He's worked for Ortofon, and he's now the president and chief designer at ZYX cartridges, ZYX cartridges. My CD player at the time was the Luxman D105U tubed output CD player, the first CD player I ever heard that even remotely sounded like analog. A Nelson Pass threshold FET9E preamp handed off to the Accuphase P300 amplifier, which drove my 8-foot-tall modified Acoustat 2+2 medallions. I also had a modified Audio Control 2XS crossover that I had cut over at 42 Hertz to feed a monoed Hafler SE240 amplifier driving an isobaric subwoofer of my own design and construction. It used a pair of competition 12-inch drivers in a push-pull alignment. Cabling all came from Esoteric or Terra Labs, but I was already exploring my own cable designs at that point. It was I guess I should say it was an ear-opening event for many of these new judges as they experienced body and bloom for the first time, or finally understood what imaging and coherence really meant. I admit I loved showing it off and teaching. So it came to be in 1989 that I founded my first magazine, The Audio Analyst. Given my love of music, my strong engineering and electronics foundation, as well as my wide-ranging and considerable knowledge in the area of playback equipment, I felt I simply had to find a way to share that understanding with those who might benefit from it. That limited venture proved fairly successful in that one of the articles I wrote for The Audio Analyst in particular, loudspeaker cables, simple passive connection or complex dynamic component, received a lot of attention. In fact, it was that very article that brought the initial offer to join Positive Feedback in 1996. My now good friend, Dr. David Robinson, put me on his masthead then as a staff writer, and occasionally as photographer when he featured my photographs for the cover and the report I did on Pierre Spray and his Maple Shade recording label in the summer of 1997. That was Volume 7, Number 2, if you want to go look it up. Shortly thereafter, that same loudspeaker cable article was reprinted at Soundstage, the first serious internet audio magazine. It had just made its appearance on the scene in 1996 and was really making impact. And I found myself on their masthead by early 1997. Besides reviewing music, DVDs, and electronics, I created the extraordinarily successful monthly Synergizing column there. According to the publisher, that column was the most featured on the site during the 3.5-year stint it had. In it, I covered all kinds of inexpensive, even free tweaks to allow you to improve the sound of your system. I shared how to build $20 ass-kicking interconnects, a $10 isolation system using baggies filled with sand, an MDF shelf and inner tubes, even homebrew CD enhancements and LP cleaning solutions. I should also point out that that loudspeaker cable article is surely the reason why Harmonic Technology contracted me in 2000 and 2001 to lead their design team, developing their original Magic line of interconnects, loudspeaker, and power cables. Cables, I'm proud to say, received overwhelmingly positive reviews when they were revealed and released nearly 20 years ago now. In October of 2000, I joined the masthead at the Stereo Times as a staff writer, and in July of 2001 I was promoted to be its executive editor. However, by March of 2003 I was forced to resign from the Stereo Times for non-payment for my work. And just over a month later, in April of 2003, my colleague and dear friend Jim Murad of Blueport Jazz suggested that we should start our own journal. Within just a few weeks, on June 17, 2003, my second magazine, On Sound and Music, was born. Because of irreconcilable differences with a third partner at On Sound and Music, I resigned in mid-August of the following year. At that point, my work moved to a new, or more aptly, returned to an old home. Back in June of 2002, Positive Feedback's David Robinson and Dave Clark of Audio Musings had joined forces and transitioned to an online version of Positive Feedback Online. I was asked to submit an article for that premiere online issue where I wrote about the new Clear Audio Virtuoso Mark II moving magnet cartridge. After my return to Positive Feedback in January of 2005, after conversations at our PFO staff party at the CES in Las Vegas that year, I was promoted to senior editor. And things seemed to stay pretty stable for about a decade. But in the spring of 2014, Stephen Rockland, who I'd worked with since our early days at Soundstage in the mid-1990s, once again floated the idea of my writing for his online webzine, Enjoy the Music, which is celebrating its 25th anniversary this year. After further conversations at Expo in 2014, we agreed to give it a go, and my first article was published there on July 14th, 2014. One day before that article appeared, a phone conversation that would yet again affect my writing trajectory took place. During an exchange I had with the Absolute Sound's editor-in-chief, Robert Harley, over fact-checking the copy for my book review of the Absolute Sound's Illustrated History of High-End Audio, Volume 1, Loudspeakers, to appear in a Positive Feedback issue 74, I made it known that it had long been my hope to write for the Absolute Sound. Apparently, my suggestion didn't strike him as totally insane, and after about a half-hour phone call, discussing the merits of the idea, he agreed to give it a try. I became a senior writer for the Absolute Sound on July 15th, 2014. The current issue, the May-June 2020 issue 305 of the Absolute Sound, contains my review of the $150,000 Valve Amplification Company's Statement 450i IQ integrated amplifier, while my take on the $150,000 AudioNet Stern line stage and Heisenberg monoblock amplifier combination will appear in an upcoming issue soon enough. Over the years, I actually developed a friendship with Harry Pearson, the founder of the Absolute Sound. As colleagues, I had helped him over the years with computing issues and even made a gift of a MacBook I no longer needed. In February of 2011, after helping him with yet another computing crisis, he graciously offered that he owed me one. I took him up on that by asking him if he'd sign the oldest copy of the Absolute Sound I had in my collection, the first issue I had ever purchased, Volume 1, Number 2, from the summer of 1973. To my great delight, he agreed, and off it went to Seacliff for his signature. I have it on display in my music room now. It bears his distinctive lowercase HP autograph on the cover, and he penned a very gracious inscription on the contents page. Dear Greg, you have brightened the audio world. My first article appeared in the Absolute Sound. It was the induction of Henry Close into the High-End Audio Hall of Fame. It appeared in issue 248 in December of 2014. As a sad irony, the digital edition of that issue that contained the first article to appear with my byline it dropped on November 4th, 2014, the very day that Harry Pearson, arguably the man most responsible for the current state of high-performance audio journalism, passed away. Rest in peace, Harry. Well, that pretty much rounds out the story of my journey. And while no one can claim to have seen or heard it all, you can see that I have routinely been in the audio trenches since the early 1970s. My experience base is both broad and deep, and over all this time, I've been privileged to have been allowed to help make a difference and to become, so I'm told, one of the most widely recognized and respected voices in the U.S. on our industry. You can visit my website anytime, theaudioanalyst.com, one word, .com, where you can see links to every article I have ever published on the web, and even read the article on loudspeaker cables that really seems to have marked the beginning of my audio writing career. My next installment here will be a video tour of my reference system. I hope you'll come back and join me for that and check it out. Till next time, thanks for watching.